It's time now for the news review of this bulletin. Turkey's military is warning citizens in northern Syria to stay in their homes as Ankara gets prepared to stage an attack. Local Syrian sources say the strike alert comes as Turkish drones and troops have been deployed to border cities in Aleppo Governorate. Turkey has ramped up its attacks on Syrian border cities recently. 3 Syrian military personnel were killed and 6 others injured in Tuesday's airstrikes on the outskirts of Aleppo. Syrian military sources say the strikes are part of Turkey's long-running efforts in support of terrorist groups in the country's north. Damascus has responded by targeting Turkish bases and armed groups inside of Syria. It has vowed not to let any attack on its army positions go unanswered. Mohammed Ali is our correspondent joining us from Damascus to tell us about the latest on this story. Ken Stone, Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, also joins us from Hamilton, Ontario, to give us an analysis. Well, Ali, tell us more about what has occurred at this point. Has the operation actually gone into its full intensity, or has anything happened yet?
Yes, so far, no Turkish military ground operation happened in northern Syria. What happened yesterday was that, according to an official military source here in Syria, there were attacks by the Turkish Air Force on Syrian army positions around Ain al-Arab, Kobani, at about 2:37 in the afternoon PM local time, which led to killing 3 Syrian army personnel and injuring 6 others. They were taken to the hospital inside Kobani itself. The Syrian army forces responded to the gunfire, causing, according to the military source, also inflicting damages and also causing human casualties in those Turkish positions and also destroying some of them. The Syrian army statement confirmed that it will respond to any attack on all front lines. This is definitely a very significant development happening there. Perhaps this is the first time we see direct targeting between both the Turkish side and the Syrian side. Yesterday, some mosques on the Turkish side of the border announced using their speakers calling on families to stay indoor and that there will be some kind of a military operation. But this did not happen because following that, the governor of Gaziantep in Turkey, Davut Gül, said on Twitter on his account that the announcement exceeded their purposes and that the situation is normal and there's nothing outside the routine. So no military operation on ground, but attacks and strikes from Turkey continue, not just in that part of Syria and the northern countryside of Aleppo, but also in the northeastern part of Syria, as also the Turkish troops and Turkish-backed terrorist groups are attacking the Aluk water pumping station, which is affecting also the civilians there.
Okay, why is Turkey attacking Syrian positions?
Well, we haven't heard any kind of statement from Turkey with this regard, but what is confirmed is that Turkey does not want any kind of a solution for Syria. It only wants unrest to continue. It wants to prolong the crisis because it's not in its interest to have security back restored in that area, because this would mean that Turkey has to get out. And we all know that Turkey now is occupying many parts of Syria. It is present in many positions outside the framework of the Astana agreements over there, and it is directly backing various terrorist groups, on top of which the Al-Nusra Front and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham inside Idlib. So it's not in its interest to actually have any kind of calm or security or stability in that area. This is why, according to many analysts, we see every once in a while Turkey trying to launch threats, attack some positions here and there, and always use that pretext that it is fighting the so-called Syria's democratic forces and that which they consider as terrorist groups. But eventually, what is very clear is that it does not want security back in Syria, and it's doing its utmost efforts to keep the situation unstable.
Yeah, it's a pretty multifaceted in its dynamics there, Ken Stone, when you take a look at the way that this whole Turkey-Syria thing is unfolding. First of all, tell us what your reading is about how Turkey stated aim is to go after these so-called SDF forces, which are U.S.-backed Kurdish forces, I believe, also included within that context. But as a correspondent says, Turkey is after instability in Syria to keep it vulnerable, I guess.
Well, in my view, it's a very unfortunate development that Turkey has unleashed these attacks, these aerial attacks and attacks through its proxy forces inside Syria on the Syrian government, especially as Syrian army soldiers were killed and wounded. This is very serious, and there hasn't been a showdown like this since back in 2020 when there was a confrontation between Syria and Turkey over Idlib, in which 33 Turkish soldiers were killed. Lately, I think it's unfortunate because lately the Turkish government has been making moves and issuing statements indicating that it wanted to resolve the conflict between itself and Syria, and it recognized the sovereignty of Syria and its territorial integrity. And when Mr. Putin mentioned on August 5th, just a week or so ago, to Mr. Erdogan that he wanted Mr. Erdogan to work with President Assad to resolve the fighting in Syria, Erdogan responded saying he was in favor of that. And in fact, that the Turkish government had made contacts, for example, at on the sidelines of the non-aligned meeting, the two foreign ministers, Mr. Çavuşoğlu and Mr. Al-Mahdad from Syria, had had talks. And apparently, according to Erdogan, the intelligence services of both countries had also had contacts. So it was looking as if, in recent weeks, that Turkey was moving toward a reconciliation with Syria and reestablishing diplomatic relations. But then these events happened in the last couple of days, which dash our hopes for a peaceful solution. Now, you asked, what is you said that there's a very multifaceted situation in Syria. And I think, from 35,000 feet, the big picture is that what's keeping everything unstable and keeping all the parties at each other's throats is the presence of the U.S., illegal presence of the U.S., the illegal occupation of the U.S. of the entire 1/3 or almost 1/3 of Syria east of the Euphrates. The U.S. is sitting on the oil. It's stealing wheat and other resources from that part of Syria. But that's not the big picture, I think. That's only part of the big picture. The big picture is the U.S. is there to destabilize the entire Syrian theater of war, and of course Iraq as well. And by the United States occupation, by linking itself, by allying itself to parties, Kurdish separatists actually, who want to cause trouble for Syria, they are stirring the pot, and they are preventing a solution, a reconciliation between Turkey and Syria. So the big issue is the U.S. has to get out of Syria, and soon. And the sooner it gets out, the sooner the problems can be resolved between Syria and Turkey.
Mohammed Ali, I don't know if you can give us information about the move that the Turkish president's made when it comes to this, and I believe our guest there was talking about it somewhat, about this reconciliation for these opposition groups to come and pretty much reconcile with the democratically elected president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, of which they did not like that. They came out in protest. What do we know about that? What happened?
Yes, there was no statements, official statements, of course, from the Syrian side on that. What we only heard is from the Turkish side, when the Turkish foreign minister said that previously he had a short, perhaps, discussion with his Syrian counterpart. But as you have just said, just following that announcement from the Turkish foreign minister, protests by various armed groups, let's say, and people inside Idlib took to the streets. The people over there and armed groups there took to the streets, and they even burned the Turkish flag. This is how angry they were about those Turkish statements. And many analysts also believe that the escalation that happened recently, since yesterday, perhaps it's kind of an escalation that wanted to calm down those protests and those armed groups that Turkey has been supporting for years eventually. So perhaps it may be a message from Turkey that we are still backing you, despite those perhaps calls for reconciliation between the so-called opposition and the Syrian government. So we still have to wait and see what will happen. But eventually, it seems that Turkey is starting to realize that there is no end to this conflict without a political solution and reconciliation. And unfortunately, there will be no end to the crisis if Turkey does not stop supporting those terrorists and close its borders before those armed groups and the support that they're getting from Turkey. Turkey has about more than 800 kilometers of borders with Syria, and this is the main gateway since day one of this crisis that terrorists use to infiltrate and to get their arms and support. So this is a main gateway that should be closed in order for the crisis to end. The support to terrorists should stop. The occupation of Turkey should stop, and the occupation, of course, of the U.S. forces there should stop in order for the crisis to end. Without those things happening, the crisis will continue.
Sure. Ken Stone, quickly if you can, you talked about how the U.S. is really the source, ultimately, of this instability that's being created there. We've had Russian forces target some of these terrorists at this Al-Tanf military base that the U.S. has itself stationed in. And that has been, Russia has been showing itself more in that respect. Given the conflict, of course, in Ukraine, that poses a very dangerous situation. But are we going to see more from Russia targeting areas around that base in a sign or a signal for the U.S. to, pack up and leave?
I think that's correct. I think the Russians have attacked the base twice, and unidentified other persons or groups have attacked that base as well. I think it's all a message to the U.S. that Russia and Syria are not going to tolerate much longer the presence of this base and its forces and its terrorist forces inside of Syria. I think that Russia is sending this message now to give advance warning to the U.S. that once the special military operation in Ukraine is over, and hopefully that will be soon, and with a peace treaty, I think Russia will then turn its attention to the Middle East and to Syria.
Thank you for that, Kent Stone, Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. Mohammed Ali, a pleasure. Our correspondent there from Damascus. Thank you. And with that, we come to an end for this news review. Thanks for tuning in.